All right, what's going on, everybody? We got a special episode for you today. It's one I've been just super excited about for a long time now. We've got Ben Garrett joining us today. Ben is the co-host of my actual favorite podcast in maybe the last year or so, called The Haunted Cosmos. And I've listened to every episode, and I really wanted to get one of these guys on to talk about this show and what they're doing. And Ben was gracious enough to want to come on and chat about all this stuff. It's a little bit different than any show we've done before in terms of what we're talking about, and I love it. It's some of my favorite stuff to dive into as a Christian, with having all of these strange, supernatural, just crazy, almost mythological stories that have happened all throughout history, and how do we explain them? And that's the whole point of what this podcast, The Haunted Cosmos, is about. And their tagline for the whole thing is "The world is not just stuff," and it's just so good. So I was really happy to have Ben on and talk about all the things that he grew up with that led him down this path of wanting to search out a lot of these things, and then some of the stories that they've told on the show, some of the things that have gotten a lot deeper and darker than he was expecting. There's just some really cool and fun and enlightening conversation that we got to have, and I was really excited for this one today. So I know you guys are going to enjoy it. Please go check out the Haunted Cosmos podcast and follow Ben and his co-host Brian Sauvé. They're on all the socials. I'll have the links in the notes below, and if you're just listening to the pod, they'll be in the show notes. But I was just really excited for this one. So please enjoy this one, because I know it's a little different than a lot of the episodes that we're doing. So it was one of my favorite ones in a long time. So before we get into the episode, I wanted to say thank you to the partners and the sponsors of the show. Steady Grounds Coffee Co. right here on the hat. George and CT Adams running this small batch roasting. It's roasted to order every time you order a bag. We have the Nomad Dark Roast out. That is the show's special blend that we designed and made just for the people that listen. Everybody can buy it, but we wanted to do something special for the people that listen and support the show. So go get the Nomad Dark Roast. It's awesome. If you use the code NOMAD15, you can actually also save a little bit on the back end when you go to purchase a bag or two. They also have subscription options that save you some money if you just get bags delivered every month on an automatic thing. But go check it out. It's awesome. It's literally the best coffee I've had. I wouldn't be putting my name and stuff on it if it wasn't. So go check them out. And then finally, thank you to Drew Kohlhofer and family at Selway Archery. They make the awesome quiver that you see, that if you follow it on Instagram or anything else where I've posted videos of me shooting my recurve, the quiver that's on the side is a rawhide quiver that was made by Drew and engraved with the Nomad Strength logo on it. They do awesome stuff, make awesome products, and go check them out, selwayarcheryproducts.com. So without further All right, everybody, welcome back to the Nomad Strength Show. We have, I don't want to say different type of show, because if you know me, then this isn't surprising that we're going to have a show completely dedicated to wild, unhinged stuff. But we're going to have on the show today Ben Garrett. And Ben is one of the co-hosts of arguably my favorite podcast of the last year, I would say, since you guys have released it, Haunted Cosmos. And if you do know me, then that makes a lot more sense. Stories of unhinged conspiracies and monsters and ghosts and all this stuff. And we're going to get into all this. But first, I just want to say thank you to Ben for making time today, man. And I'm down to go into some weird places today.
Yeah. Hey, me too. No, Ross, thank you for having me on. It's a huge honor. I'm really happy to be here and just excited to chat. I've never actually met you. We've exchanged stuff on Twitter before, but man, what a face,
What a face.
This guy's got a face for YouTube. I'm telling you,
that is the truth. That's more so a face for podcasting, because that's
I was gonna say, I've got a face for radio,
There it is.
There it is. So, you got to play to your strengths, but
That's right. That's right. Well, so let's give the brief overview of this, what we're outlining in this show, really what you guys do with Haunted Cosmos, and then we'll kind of take it back in time a bit, because I want to know how you got super interested in all this stuff. So why don't you give just the overview for the people of what the Haunted Cosmos is, and then we'll kind of Quentin Tarantino this and then go back to the beginning.
Nice. Yeah, no, the basic thesis of the show is that the world is not just stuff. You know, you live in a world that was spoken by a creator, by the creator. And that means that there's a lot of weird things that happen that shouldn't surprise us that they happen, but that we should be drawn to because the cosmos was made by a god, by the God of the Bible. That means that the cosmos reflects the creativity of that God. And so you ought to try to know the place that you live. You ought to try to know the story that you're in. And, you know, humanity's done good and bad jobs of that in the past. But one of the things that we are convicted of is that we're doing a bad job of that now. The dismissible things that aren't easily explained away by a materialist perspective or empiricism and positivism and stuff like that. So, yeah, the basic thesis is the world is not just stuff. So let's take that and run with it and try to find all the mysteries that we can. Not necessarily answer them, but just find them. The first step in solving a mystery is to figure out that there's actually a mystery there, and then do it all through a Christian lens, a biblical worldview, seeking to glorify God as we just marvel at the many things that he's done that we just have no clue about. We think that's really great. So that's the basic idea of the show.
It's so cool because like you said, it's about topics and stories and things that are so often just thrown away just immediately, especially by Christians, right? Like it seems like oftentimes with some of these stories, Christians are the first people to be like, you know, like that's all just kooky, whatever stuff. And your guys' approach to it is like, well, first of all, almost all this stuff we can read about. You know, like in the Bible, like there's so many of these things that are literally told to us in the Bible. And so that part of it always, and you guys open the first episode of the whole thing, probably still is my favorite, honestly. Like there's been some bangers here, but dude, sea monsters and stuff stuff out in the oceans and the deep, like that is what I have been like kind of crazy about for as long as I can remember in my life. So I was hooked. Atlantis, like I was hook, line, and sinker from that very first one, man.
Dude, me too. You know, we covered a lot of ground in that first episode. You're not the first person that has actually most people say like if I had to pick one, that'd be the one, and I get it. But I wonder if those people have gone back and listened to it recently because the sound was so much worse and the writing was so bad. So because of that, I'll drop a teaser for your listeners. We're actually going to be starting season 3 with another one of those. Kind of revamped, new mysteries, and we're gonna just dive back, literally, pun intended, dive back in.
Yes,
because that gets everybody excited. Brian and I just love that stuff, so we're happy to talk about it all day.
And my favorite part is, and this is the case in so many of these things, so many of these stories and these avenues that you guys have gone down, the dismissal of written accounts that are like with the sea monster one, for example, like however many dozens or hundreds of their writings of people literally describing to like the detail the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and we can't just you can't just dismiss that. Like, there's no way that many people could have seen something that accurately and described it as the same as somebody else completely in a different part of the world. And then, and then that not be a thing. Like that's always with everything, like with Bigfoot, with all this stuff, like there's been so many stories that people have these accounts of, and you're like, well, this person said it on this part of the world. And another dude over here said the exact same thing. Like described it the exact same way a century later. And it's like the same sound. It's all crazy when you think of it that way.
I always like to say people lie. That's true. But people don't only lie. That's not the only thing people do. Sometimes people tell the truth. And I started to take that principle and kind of run with it and look back at even beyond Bigfoot accounts and UFO encounters, and those are certainly striking. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And there's no shortage of amazing stories there.
Yeah.
But I took it further back and I was like, what about mythology? You know, what if people aren't making it all up? What if they actually did see these strong gods, quote unquote, that were roaming the earth for a time? What would we do with that as Christians if it were true? And you find like, no, we actually can speak to that too. Now, I don't know if the Greeks were being completely truthful in their stories about Zeus and Aphrodite and everything, but they could have been. The thing is they could have been, and it wouldn't, and it actually doesn't make a chink in the armor of the Christian worldview a single bit. We know what to do with that stuff, and so then you take that and you just come forward to the modern day, and you're like, okay, well, we have all this technology that's making us really good at lying. But it's also making us really good at sharing things that are true. Sometimes, again, even in the internet age, some things are true. And so you kind of have to take that principle and keep it in mind and not buy everything that you hear. That's foolish. That's something that an idiot does. But take everything that you hear and say, well, let's just say that it is true. What would we do with it? And if you can't do anything with it, it's probably not true. But if you can do something with it, then at least you're prepared to give a defense or to, use it to compel someone to the truth of the Christian faith. Use it to just improve your own love and delight for the things that God's made.
It's such a cool way to look at it, for that reason, because I think a lot of people because it's been so and I don't know why. Maybe in the last 100 and so years, it seems like, and maybe I'm off on this timeline, but because we've always had like what was the magazine that was always on the newsstands that had
like
crazy, what was that one called? That
the
they made fun of it in like Men in Black.
Yeah.
That was like what they went for leads in Men in Black, was to go to that National Enquirer.
And now
there
it's The Simpsons. You go to The Simpsons to predict the future.
Yeah, but a lot of these like tales of these kind of things, maybe they carried more weight back then. I'm not sure, but it seems like because they were told for so long, just recently, it seems like a lot of these are like, now it's like, oh, you guys were all just kooks. We've been kooks forever. We understand so much more now. Yeah. Everybody before 100 years ago was an idiot, basically. And I think this happens in a lot of different realms of life. In terms of technology, it's like, well, how did we ever survive for so long before 100 years ago and the things that we have now? And I think that probably bleeds, that worldview probably bleeds into things like this too, where it's like, oh, these were all just crazy campfire stories. Everybody's lying about everything. It was all just whatever, and then you go into, you dig deep into these things, and then you're like, but was it?
Yeah. Like the nature of sin is that it can't create anything. It just corrupts something that was already made. Sin doesn't make anything new. It just twists, it bends. And so if you take that to its conclusion, then you have to say, well, every lie has to start somewhere true. And then it twists it. Yeah. And it could twist it a lot. And it could look completely foreign, or it could only twist it a little bit. The best lies are made up of small truths that have just been rearranged and repackaged to not be the whole truth. But that's what makes them such good lies. So you got to ask yourself, like those ridiculous tabloids and crazy History Channel shows like Ancient Aliens, and why are they still on? Like, why do people still spend their time and money on these things? Well, it's because they know that there's something there. Now, it's ridiculous. And the guy with the crazy hair that my face has been plastered on him countless times, like he is crazy, aliens. He is crazy, and I think he's like off his rocker or whatever in so many ways, but he's also touching on something that has a genuine pulse. And to ignore it is either foolish, hubris, or just completely uninteresting. And if you're going to be a Christian, you have to be interesting, because you have to be interested. We always say interesting people are interested people, and Christians are the most interested people in the world. And so if that's true, then you have to take all that stuff and say, okay, well, in like the 1800s, we had the rise of empiricism and positivism, and it made universities into atheistic, materialistic tabernacles.
Yeah.
It made science into a religion. And you even had men like Herman Bavinck that were trying to push back against that back in that day because they saw where it would lead. But the grain of longing for a more holistic vision of the entire cosmos, seen and unseen, has never left. And so that's why you have, like, even though it's taboo and it's looked down upon, you still have these magazine publishers and these History Channel shows that are thriving.
Yeah.
Because people know in their heart of hearts that there just is more there than they've been told by the atheistic, materialistic scientists.
So now we're going to go back in time.
Yes.
So I want to go back to young Ben at whatever age this sort of sparked for you. Do you have like an instance or a moment where something in this sphere became super interesting to you that then it's like, not that you become consumed by it, but it's like, wow, this is cool stuff to learn about. I want to follow these trails wherever it goes. Like, do you remember how early on that was for you in a lot of this stuff?
It had to be really early. I used to watch Mythbusters on Discovery Channel like constantly, and I mean, shoot, I was younger than 10 for sure.
Yeah,
must have been like 7 or something, and I think that's kind of what started it. The idea that there were things that people didn't know the answers to was pretty interesting to me, because school just tells you the answers that they don't. They try to hide what we don't know about yet until you get into some higher education, but. So that was really interesting, and there were Discovery Channel shows like Bermuda Triangle Mysteries and the Bigfoot encounter or whatever, and I thought that was kind of cool. But the other thing that I've noticed now that I'm older is that I've always been heavily affected by stories that scare me for whatever reason, even like a true crime thing, which is probably just glorified gossip. But I used to be really into it, and it really moved me and scared me a lot. You know, as a kid, I would watch a horror movie that I should not have been watching, and I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks. Like, genuinely could not sleep for 3 weeks, and then after that, the sleep was bad. And I think now that I'm a little older and doing this as a living, which is crazy,
right.
I don't know. It's easier, and there's more. Space to reflect and think like, okay, well, why is that? Why is that so affecting to me? And why now in my older age am I still drawn to stories that scare me? Why am I so curious about them? And I think that has a lot to do with it. There's something that mystery draws people in. There's something there at a very basic level. Mystery draws people in because Proverbs is true. It's the glory of God to conceal a thing, and it's the glory of kings to search things out. And Christians are supposed to be priest kings on the earth. So we are drawn to things that have to be searched out. But I think there's also something to fear that doesn't fit. It's kind of like how people become obsessed with death far more often than people become obsessed with life. And I think that it's because death is obviously unnatural to us. We know that it's not supposed to be there. It's not actually a gift, it's a curse. And we know that. And so we obsess over it and trying to reverse it and avoid it or worship it and just solely look forward to what lies on the other side, to the point where we'll rush death and we'll invite it in way earlier than it needs to be, and we'll end our own lives. And in the same way, things that really horrify you, are like unto death, in that they just don't belong. They're not supposed to be there, and you know that. And so because they're not supposed to be there, there's almost an extra driving force in being attracted to them. They have their own gravitational pull, I think, for a lot of people. And one of the things that I've become convinced of, and I think that I was convinced of it as a kid, but I certainly didn't have the words for it, and maybe didn't have the, the theological acumen to back it up.
Sure.
Is that Christians ought to be able to handle the things that are scary and also use them for the purposes of God's kingdom. And what I mean by that is like the horror movie franchise is not off limits to Christians, I don't think. I think that the modern, the horrible gore and sexual degeneracy and just body horror that we have. Yeah, like don't do that. You can't do
Right.
that. But the idea of scaring someone, to make them see something that's true, is actually really effective, and it's because man has fallen. So when we're faced with the reality of our fall, and we take it to a conclusion that most people wouldn't see in a normal life, it can be really, really potent in drawing people away from that to something that's actually comedic instead of tragic. So I don't know, that's pretty rambling.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
More than you bargained for.
Did you see, I think it just came out this last year, a movie called Nefarious?
No, I've heard a lot about it. Isn't that Steve Deese?
Steve, yeah, it's based on his book, Nefarious Plot, and the movie itself is a little bit different because his book is essentially what he would liken to like a modern day ish version of Screw Tape Letters.
Okay,
like that's how he wrote it. Was from the point of view of Nefarious, who was like a demon king, right, and outlining his plan for America essentially. And so the movie takes that as a theme and it applies it to this guy who's on death row in prison, and he's telling like this psychologist everything. So, and literally 90% of the movie is shot in one room, in this interrogation room with the prisoner, the guy on death row, and this psychologist that's coming
cool.
to check. Like, and it is intense. And I mean, and there are great, like you said, taking those things of absolutely terrifying people in real ways, but then having a worldview that can deal with it. Right. Like, and it does a great job of that. And the book does the same thing, but, there's not many of those things. And it seems like in media, the idea of being good storytellers is like passed by to push a certain message. And that happens with Christian media too. Like there's the things where it's like, we're just going to make it a sermon movie. Yeah. Instead of like tell a cool story. Yeah. And like have people like it, you know?
Yeah.
You know
I'm sorry.
I mean?
Like a sermon is for the Lord's service. It's a means of grace when it's preached by a qualified pastor, by a man. Right. It's a movie is not a sermon. And so these movies that try to be are completely ineffective. And no one even likes them, and they're like kitschy and stupid. But in the meantime, and then you have something like, we'll just use Lord of the Rings, that is not Christian. It isn't, but it is through and through. Right. Anyone that reads that, they're reading a Christian man's heart being poured out on a page in this world that he subcreated. In front of God. And so you see how he actually sees the world. And that's what compels people, because you get an image into the pathos of how a Christian man thinks, or how a Christian woman thinks about the world, not by them just telling you how they think about the world, but by them showing you. This is a principle in stories that you show, don't tell. Yeah. If you overwhelm the people with exposition, they're not going to really follow you. And if they do, it's not going to be very effective. But if you show them, well, then you've communicated conviction and belief. And they start to, even if they disagree, they start to understand that you believe what you're saying to the very bottom. And that compels people to pay attention. One of the best examples that I can think of accidentally Christian horror is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. She was obviously not a Christian. She was a very sexually degenerate person. But you see in Frankenstein almost a confession of sorts. Like her heart is clearly poured out on the page, and she's confessing this monster that she's made, despite being a likable person herself. There's so many layers to it. And you walk away from that book being changed. And a lot of people aren't able to describe why they feel changed after they put a book down, where they just want to like stare out of a window as it's raining and like smoke a cigarette or something like that.
Right.
A major life event just happened to them. All they did was finish a book. And it's because you have now had someone's DNA, so to speak, someone's pathos passed to you. And that means they did a good job. And that means also that you are now different because of it. And so you have to figure out what to do with being different. And to kind of bring this home,
Yeah.
One of the things that Christians have lost, I think, in the modern day is the ability to tell tragedy in a way that actually takes people deeper into the comedy that's happening behind the tragic facade of the world.
Yeah.
For some people, their life will be tragic. There's two options. You can go tragedy or comedy. And we see a lot of the tragic because even though we're saved, we still sin. Sin is literally everywhere. But behind it all, there is an underlying deep comedy that is unbelievably beautiful and that compels anyone who has the eyes to see. And so the more that we can pray to be used by God as a means for him to exercise his grace on someone, to open their eyes and see the beauty, well, we should take that opportunity. And telling compelling horror and tragedy is one of those means. I really firmly believe that.
It reminds me with the tragedy versus comedy thing, that line actually reminds me of a movie that I actually enjoy despite its intensity with a lot of really dark material, right? But that's the most recent version of Joker that Joaquin Phoenix did. But his line in it actually says, like, I used to think my life was a tragedy, and then I realized that it's actually a comedy.
Yeah.
And that's like what sets him over the edge into being the Joker and sending him down the insane. Like, it was literally when he made that realization. And so, like, when you just said that was like one of the first lines that came to mind, I'm like, dang, that's like that, just that switch in perspective can do a lot for somebody.
That is amazing. First of all, amazing movie. I love
crazy good movie.
But second, it kind of shows the point of a good lie being made up of small truths. He's telling the truth.
Yeah.
You know, like some people do have a tragic life. That's very true, but others don't. And the fact is, John 3:16 is true. God came to save the world, and any who call upon the name of the Lord Jesus Christ will be saved. So everyone has the opportunity to have their life be a comedy. Obviously, we know that only the elect will truly, but from man's point of view, we all have the opportunity. And so, yeah, you can make that realization. You can have a discernment as a gift of common grace that's genuinely good, that sees, oh, it's actually just comedy behind it all.
Yeah.
But in reality, if you don't have Christ as the anchor of the comedy, then your comedy will lead to tragedy for everyone around you. And the Christian comedy is one that says, my life for yours. It's a spiritual perspective of comedy that's going to look like dying. Christ did die, but in dying, he won. And so that's the thing sin has done such a good job of twisting this into making people think, no, it is comedic. It's true, but it's only comedic for you, no one else.
Right.
But the truth is, no, it's comedic for everyone, not you. That's
so
the thing.
good, dude. So good.
So it's a complete inversion of the real truth. It's comedic for the world, for the universe, for God, but probably not for you until you die. And in dying, you're a seed planted that sprouts forth fruit in eternity.
So good, man. I wanted to bring up too, you mentioned one of the things that you liked earlier on was the show Mythbusters.
Oh, so good.
And you became like an engineer, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that seems like a pretty strong seed planted early on.
Yeah.
With that show that ultimately at one point became what your profession was. So
yeah, no doubt.
From approaching a lot of this stuff, you came from a fairly, you've used the term like scientific materialistic profession, right? Like that uses these material things to explain a lot of this stuff. How was being in that field while having a different worldview, essentially? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. It was certainly interesting, I think. I also don't have as much of a stereotypical like engineer personality. I like I'm more extroverted. Like I get wound up around people, and so that in itself was interesting. But I loved the people that I was with. I really genuinely, I admire the engineer's mind much better. Most engineers are a better engineer than I was, but and I really admire the way that their mind works. But one of the things It's funny. That's a really good question, because one of the things I'm realizing now is the building that I worked in when I was an engineer, building 1295 at Hill Air Force Base. It was the A-10 SPO. And I was a stress engineer, so I would just do math all day and write tech reports about a repair and whether or not it would work. And there were no windows in the building. It was a big building.
Yeah.
There was one window, but it was covered by a faux wall that they had put up to make a cubicle for somebody. So there were functionally no windows.
Right.
And that tends to be the trend.
Yeah.
When you get engineer types and you tell them to make something for people, they're not going to do a good job. And it's because that's not what they're for. It's not because they're dumb or they're bad people or they don't know what beauty is. No, it's just you're asking a wrench to be a screwdriver, and it has to be a wrench, and it's going to be the best wrench you've ever seen. But you can't ask it to do something that it can't do. And so I think that it was just, it quickly became a realization for me. I only worked in the field for about 2.5 years. And I quickly realized that I am not a wrench. I just am not. I really admire them a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that their minds are just beautiful, the way that they work, but it's not me. So there were some butting heads here and there, but ultimately it was just kind of people being people. And so
Sure.
I would say that it was overwhelmingly positive, actually.
Yeah.
And then once COVID came in, it got a little more negative, but it is
trap a bunch of people in a vacuum inside a building with no windows, and then throw a pandemic at them. I can't imagine that goes well.
But anything like that's just water under the bridge.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is interesting how you can kind of see the manifestation of someone's thought come out in the spaces that they would make for someone else to be in. And it's, an engineer's just not for that. That's not what he's for. Let the architect do that.
Right.
But train them better so that they're not so modern and gay.
Right.
And make them more classical.
Right.
And then let the engineers build the thing. That's what they're going to do really well.
Yeah, exactly. That's too funny, man. So let's look at some of these. I want to get into some of these episodes because I want to know. You guys have done 2 seasons now.
Yeah.
And just wrapped up season 2 this week, actually, as of time that we're recording this.
Yeah, yesterday, as of recording.
Yeah, which is wild. And you guys are taking, I think you said like a month or so before season 3 comes, or do you even have a time?
I don't know.
When know?
It's either a 5 or 6 week break. I don't know. But we'll release a Dusty Tome, our Patreon show. We'll release one of those each week to get people excited. Sure.
So we mentioned the one at the very beginning, with sea monsters and Atlantis, and dude, first of all, the Atlantis part of that episode, I'm literally like, I'm doing the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where I'm whistling and pointing because I'm like, that's one that I've like been so into for so long. So as soon as you guys get into it, I'm like, hey, and he's like, he's doing it. So that was, I love that one.
I lost you.
Oh, am I there?
Oh, there you are.
Got me back?
Yep. Sorry, just glitched out.
No worries. So yeah, the Atlantis piece of that, I was so into when you guys started going over that, because that's one of those ones. Like, and I said it before. There's something about the ocean that really just like stirs in me. You know what I mean? And
I think that's every man.
Oh, dude. And I think because you mentioned like the fear aspect of being drawn to things, right? And that was always a thing for me growing up, being younger, was being like deathly afraid of open water. Yeah. Right. Like I even still to this day, like I would definitely not prefer to be out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, but it's a fear that is also a fascination. And so I think what's a cool way that I end up looking at a lot of these stories that you guys do was, some of them are straight up terrifying, right? But that aspect of it makes me really fascinated by it. I'm like, oh, why is this one making me so freaked out? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, what is it about this that I am all of a sudden like terrified of? And that makes me want to be like, I want to know why. Like, why does that make me so freaked out? So do you have, I mean, you guys map these things out, how you're going to cover which topics, but like, did you have any that surprised you kind of in that way? Where like, oh, we'll talk about this, but then you start researching, you're like, holy cow, that got to a place I was not expecting.
Yeah. Vampires was the first one for me. I started looking into it and I was like, oh, this will be fun. Some medieval stories about people eating people. And
right.
Who doesn't like that?
Right.
And then I started getting into the much older stuff, the really ancient, like Mesopotamia, even Hebrew, Egyptian legend. And I was like, this is really messed up. Like the motif of consumption of blood and God telling his people that the blood is the life of a thing and therefore you can't consume it. And then you have like the Lord's Supper, the Lord's Supper being a sacrament of, this is going to sound really bad, a sacrament of like vampiric scale where we are consuming Christ's blood. It's a real spiritual presence. It's what Calvin says. It's not physical, but it's still just as real because it's spiritual and you are consuming the blood of your maker. And in a way that means that you are partaking of the life that he has within himself. And I just got into it and I was like, this is, first of all, a hour and 10-minute episode is just not going to do it justice. Like,
whole season dedicated to that.
You could write volumes on that, on that and follow it through, like life or blood being so connected to sexuality, some of it for obvious reasons, but then some not so obvious reasons where you have a bloodline representing your progeny. And so your icicle just fell outside, exploded. I thought I was getting shot at. You're passing on your blood to your children. You're creating life from the life that you already have. And one of the primary forms of curse and corruption and just horrible tragedy is the taking away of children. You're stealing purity. You're stealing life. You're stealing blood from a people. Anyway, like you can just go on and on and on and on and on. And it really shocked me. I was like, wow, this is, there's potential to do something important here, even if it's just in refining my own thought about how the world works. But another one would probably be the Aliens one, the last episode of season 1.
Yeah.
Almost all of the ones in season 2, except for Angels, Bermuda Triangle, and Dyatlov Pass, have had the same effect on me, where I'm like, wow, this goes really deep.
Yeah.
But another one from season 1, where I was much more innocent and just thinking it was going to be like a fun ghost podcast, was the Aliens one, because I quickly found out how akin UFO abduction stories are to like satanic ritual, like horrible, sexual practices and stuff, and how they're almost the exact same. And that for me was a nail in the coffin, where I was like, oh wow, this is crazy. This isn't just,
that's the point where you're like, okay, what did we get into?
Yeah.
And if I continue with this, I'm continuing with this. Like, this is the point of I make the decision.
Right. This either has to become my whole thing or I have to step away. And it became my whole thing.
Yeah. So. It's too funny, man. I think the one, the vampires one I was going to say is like that kind of, that got a lot darker than I was anticipating, because like everything that, I mean, that's such a common character in any horror thing, as far as we've been telling popular horror stories, right? Like that's, and there's been so many permutations of what vampirism is, from actual vampires like Dracula and then all of these different ways they're being told. Like the most recent one, the one that I really enjoyed actually from how they portrayed it was the series called Underworld.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that one?
That chick. She's
I can't remember her name. Kate something.
Yeah, Kate something.
And it had I like how they did it. That was pretty good. But they just came out with one I want to say it was just a few months ago, And it was a period piece set in like the 1800s because they're on like this big wooden, giant cross ocean ship, and the Dracula beast is on the ship with them as they're crossing, and I can't remember what it's called.
I saw that trailer on Instagram or something. I was
I'm like,
scrolling through.
That actually looks pretty cool.
Yeah.
And he was like some weird, like alien with wings, like crazy beast looking version of it. It wasn't like the Gary Oldman version, of Bram Stoker's. Where, like there's been so many different, but just the concept, like that was one that as soon as I started reading more about it too, I'm like, holy cow, this wasn't as surface funny, like kind of stuff. Like this is real dark stuff.
Yeah. I expected like, oh, it's this myth that popped up because of the plague or whatever.
Right.
And I was like, oh, wow, this is really deep and dark. Funny story. Oh, wait, I was going to say the most recent episode, season 2, episode 10 on DMT. I was shocked at what we found when we were looking into that. I was just like, oh my, like your dare officer was right. If you do drugs, that will get you. There's absolutely no doubt. It's so messed up. It was just really, really bad. But one of the things I was going to say was just as a funny story with the Atlantis thing.
Yeah.
So Brian and I were on a kind of a work trip in Orlando, Florida. And we went to Chili's one night, as usual, and enjoyed some El Presidentes and had some chips and salsa. It was amazing. And that's when we really came up with the idea for Haunted Cosmos, and we really defined it. And then so anyway, we went back to the hotel, and we were like, well, let's try to record episode 1. And so we had written up some stuff. We did the whole Atlantis thing like 5 minutes before recording. We Googled like, what about Atlantis? And we just and watched the video, and we were both jaws on the floor, just like, you've got to be kidding me. So yeah, it was almost by accident that the Atlantis bit was in there. And it remains, I think, like one of my high points for sure over the past year.
That's so funny, man. Like I said, that's one that really has been a singular story that I have been fascinated with as long as I can remember. Like,
so here's another Easter egg.
Yeah.
In season 3, we're going to do a whole episode just on Atlantis.
There we go.
Because it turns out there's like dozens, if not hundreds, of different Atlantis type legends around the world. Yeah. And they're all very cool. So
that's awesome.
We're going to be checking those out for sure.
I remember, I'm sure just because of my age, the first thing I remember was probably the movie, the cartoon Disney movie. Like, that they did those two. And because the first one came out, I was probably 7 or 8 years old or something like that when the first one came out.
Didn't Little Mermaid, didn't she live in Atlantis?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Right?
Yeah. And then that's Aquaman. There's so many different like popular comic and other Disney whatever type characters and stories. I mean, not even before Disney, but just like forever that like those characters, like that's at home is Atlantis.
And dude, it just goes to show that it's important. It's an important topic because Disney's been a psyop from day one. So they're just trying to like mock Atlantis and make it seem really childish.
Exactly.
So that people are like, oh, that's just a trope they use for Ariel. That's where Ariel's dad lives. And you're like, no, I'm not going to buy into the psyop, you pagan pedophile Disney people.
Too funny, dude. Okay, so you have this next season. I'm not going to ask I'm not going to tell you to tease the whole season, right? Because that's part of what I enjoy is like seeing what you guys are going to do the next episode, right? But you mentioned the Atlantis one. So I'm going to ask even farther out. Ones that aren't even in season 3. Are there topics that you are like, we need to get to this at some point, but like I don't know when it'll be, but this one's been in my mind forever. Like I really want to go into this. I'm sure you've probably got a dozen, but is there one that kind of stands out as one that you think would be really fun to go into?
Yeah. I think there's 2. One is Hollow Earth. Because I'm a Hollow Earth proponent.
Yes.
Yeah, big hollow, not like eggshell I think that's stupid, but like
Right.
massive caverns, because Sheol has to be in there, you know? So
Right.
there you go. Hollow Earth would be one. Another one is, excuse me.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness, it's on the tip of cursed mathematics. Yes.
Interesting.
I really love math. It's my favorite subject in school. And I've always been like, yeah, there's just like, it's not right. I got up to calculus 4 in college because of engineering school. And then, you know, I took a bunch of physics classes, and you're doing calculus and all this stuff. And then on my own time, I would just look up some what I thought were cool math concepts. And I was like, this is not like, something doesn't fit. For example, the example I always give is the Fibonacci sequence is, you know, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, etc. Is one of the most enigmatic things in the universe. I don't get it, because it's capable of being the building block of such beauty, you know, ferns, the Parthenon. All of these things are built on the golden ratio that we get from the Fibonacci sequence. But it's also capable of horrible ugliness. For example, the Tool song Lateralis, which is a cool song, by the way, I have to admit. But the message is really, really dark and really like panentheistic and evil. And when you listen to it, it affects you in a certain way, and it makes you feel like you're kind of descending into this pit. You don't feel very good. And then at the end, it's just kind of like raging in the pit, and it's supposed to spit you back out, and it kind of doesn't. It's kind of a lie. But that song uses the Fibonacci sequence heavily in its time signatures and in the syllables that the lead singer uses to write the lyrics in. And so it does have an effect. It really does. And then it gets into my whole thing about how spirals are probably evil, or mostly evil, and we don't really know how to make a good spiral anymore. But anyway, so cursed math. I have no idea how to do a show on that, and it would probably suck. But someday I want to try it, take a stab at it. We'll see.
That's awesome. You kind of covered a little bit of it when you guys did the aliens one, but I think the one that it's another one. Like there's Atlantis, there's a couple that I'm like, this is my jam. The idea of Area 51.
Oh yeah.
Like that one, like that. I'll lose it on that one. And then honestly, there's a lot of space stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a whole, I mean, there could be a whole season of just space stuff. You know what I mean?
Oh, they
got me back. There we go. Yeah, I was just saying I mean, there's a whole season's worth of just space stuff. You know what 100%. I mean? But like those kind of things, and it's probably tied into the same thing as like the oceans with space. I think a lot of people share a lot of that same insights, and the way they feel about those two things are probably come from a very similar place.
They fundamentally behave in the same way for the human mind as far as comprehension goes. Like space operates on a scale that we're just not capable of comprehending, and so we look at the ocean and we're like, it's just like space, and we're not wrong to say that. I don't think space is a really interesting one too. I agree. The medievals had this idea of the curse, the scholastics, that was surprisingly, viewed as surprisingly orthodox by many, many early reformers, which said that the effects of the curse only went so far as concerned man, and that was limited to the Earth's atmosphere. And so they said that the curse ended at the sphere of the moon, at the moon's orbit, kind of was a boundary, and everything beyond the dark side of the moon was not cursed, and so it was holy, and it was as it should be. I don't think that's true. I don't. But I do think it's really interesting, and it reveals a lot of how they viewed the heavens and the planets and the stars. And it's part of why I have posited before that, like black holes are fallen angels, or quasars are fallen angels, or something like that. And even if that's not technically true, which it probably isn't, it doesn't really matter, because imaginatively and conceptually, it gives you the same message as saying, well, Jupiter is an angel. I mean, Aquinas thought that. Aquinas said that there was a spiritual intelligence that guided all of the planets and stars, and they're sent to govern the sky. I think that there's certainly legs to that, theological legs. But even if it's not technically true, it doesn't really matter. The point is, everything in creation has to play its part. It's all a symphony. And even if the symphony seems like it's full of discord to the man, it's probably because it is, because we operate on such short time scales. But the time signature of forever, for all of history, will work itself out to be something that's beautiful. And so I think that you have to take that idea. We're really good at doing that on the earth, but you have to also take that into the heavens and say, okay, well, how does the music of creation work out in the stars, in the black holes, in the supernovas and all this stuff? So anyway, I think space would be a really, really fascinating one.
So if we're looking at really how, with people who maybe haven't ever spent time in this part of their minds, right? Mm-hmm. Like beginning to explore these things, specifically Christians, right? There's probably a bit of overwhelm feeling of, how do I begin to have this outlook or begin to feel okay about looking into these kind of things, right? Yeah. Like, how do you recommend people go about approaching this without getting in trouble going too far down some dark stuff, right? Yeah. I mean, because that can be very easy to do when you start going into some of these things. And I believe, and that's going to be intentional as well, like to suck people into those dark areas. So how do you recommend when people want to learn about these things and seek things out like this, like we're supposed to, they do it in a way that's good?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that you hit the nail on the head. When you try to, when you try to, it's going to sound bad. When you try to enlighten the way that you view the world, I mean that in the best way.
Sure.
You tend to put yourself in a more perilous position than one who just says ignorance is bliss. Yeah. And so there are going to be ditches on both sides of the road. But the one that's going to be a danger for people getting into it is going way too far.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things. Two really easy ones are be a Orthodox Christian. Learn your confession and say yes and amen. God has, in his word, given us very clear boundaries of what is Orthodox and what is not. And we ought to love those boundaries such that when we bump up against them, we have no interest in going beyond it, because that would mean leaving the beautiful field that it's encompassing. So love the boundaries of orthodoxy. And I mean like Westminster Catechism, Westminster Confession, the London Baptist Confession for the Baptist out there. Love those confessions, know them, whatever exceptions you have to them, make sure that you have good biblical reason to make those exceptions. And anyway, and then, but recognize that those confessions create a fence line that gives you a field that you can explore.
Yeah.
It doesn't answer everything, and that's by design. God left things unanswered, and that's part of the point. So enjoy exploring and grazing in the field of orthodoxy that a Reformed confession gives you. So I would say that first of all. And then apart from that, find a good church. If you're not in a good church, then you're a fool. Be in a good church. And you're also sinning, by the way. So repent and be in a good church. And a good church is one that faithfully preaches the gospel of Christ and the whole counsel of God, believes the Bible, faithfully administers the sacraments, and practices church discipline. Those are the three pillars of a true church. So be a part of one of those and be a fruitful part of one of those, and enjoy all of the many blessings that come from that. And, be held accountable. So enjoy the means of grace, enjoy the Lord's Supper, enjoy the word preached. If you're not baptized, enjoy baptism. Get baptized if you're not, and baptize your kids also. And then apart from that, I would say that Brian and I recognize how serious of a thing this is, of a need. And so we're actually, we've never teased this. Okay. We're working on a book, and
Nice.
I am not going to give a timeline at all because I'm sure it'll be wrong. But we're working on a book, and the book is a attempt to answer the question that you just asked.
Yeah.
How should we look at the world, and what should we do about it? So look out for that. It'll be coming up.
That's awesome.
Someday.
That's awesome. And just the idea of the looking at it as a field, like you said, with fence line, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that also helps your attitude while pursuing these things as well. Because I kind of get and I'm sure, I promise you're probably like this as well with a lot of maybe you have friends that aren't as into this stuff as you are. And you're kind of the kooky one, right? Like that's me in certain groups of friends that I have, right? But like when random stories come up that just seem like totally outlandish, I love that. Like I'm happy, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like, who knows? Who has a clue? I don't have a clue.
Yeah.
But that sounds awesome. I wouldn't put it past anything for that to be the case. But like, let's go figure it out. And like, I have those kind of guardrails in my mind where I'm like, okay, I can see the direction that this is going. Yeah. Right. Like a lot of things, it doesn't take a super long amount of time before you can kind of begin to see this is going a way that I probably shouldn't continue following.
That's
like,
right.
I think like a lot of discernment will happen a lot sooner than a lot of people think in these areas. If especially if they're following those guidelines that you had mentioned before. Like that's kind of the point, is those things give you discernment when following a lot of these trails.
Yeah, they are a protection. You know, it's like a child with his parents. The church is our mother, our mother church. And if we forsake her teaching, then we're fools. And the fool is the one that says in his heart there's no God. Like the pipeline's very real if you forsake the teaching of your mother. So yeah, I would say you don't want to just adhere to the standard of God's word. You want to love it. You want to be enamored with it. If you find yourself far more obsessed with like weird fringe Bigfoot theories than you do God's word and the glories hidden therein, you probably need to just step back a little bit. But having said all that, once you're good on those things, be curious. Yeah. Like go crazy. I mean, seriously, and ask for the Lord's help in giving you wisdom and discernment and increasing your faith in him every day. Don't seek out encounters. Yeah. Hopefully that goes without saying. Don't go to a graveyard and be like, if there's any demons here, I'd love to talk. Right. You deserve whatever's coming to you is not good, but you deserve it. So don't do that. Just for being dumb, you deserve it. Don't do that. Right. If you play stupid games, you'll win stupid prizes. That's true physically and spiritually. And then the other thing is read really good books. Read old books. Ancient church fathers, Augustine, you know, those guys, man, their minds were beautiful and they were insane. And you'd be shocked at the type of things that they talk about. Read Calvin on angels. Yeah. A lot of people think Calvin was a dry guy. Yeah. People that think that have never read him. Read him on angels. It will shock you the rich vision that he had for the ministry of the angels in the everyman Christian life. And then read good fiction as well. You want to be formed by story, because people are formed by story. That's why the Bible is a narrative and not just a systematic textbook. And you want to be formed by good stories so that the formation that occurs is actually fruitful and beneficial. So read really good books.
I think that's kind of a good segue into beginning to wrap things up a little bit with the book topic. There's a couple that you mentioned, like old church fathers and and things from, you know, a couple hundred years ago or more. Mm-hmm. You read some of these and you're like, dude, this could have been written a week ago. Yeah. You know, and the one that the first one I remember really having that feeling about was it's a 3-volume set, the Christian in Complete Armor. And it was I think his last name was Duvall. But it was written in like he was a Puritan. So it was like early 1600s ish was around the time that this came out. And you're reading it and you're just like, are you sure that I have this date right, that I'm reading this, that he wrote this? Cause this literally and it's not because he's like predicting the future, but it's more about just the the aspects of human nature and these things that we all still deal with.
Yeah.
Like he's not out here predicting what's happening in 2024, but it's like all of these behaviors and attitudes and the way that people behave, it's the exact same still as it was throughout all of history. So you connect with all of these things and you're like, wow, maybe we did know a bunch of stuff back then that like, these guys were pretty smart.
I've been thinking recently about trying to reconcile the praise that the men of Issachar get for knowing the times, which is a goal that we all should have. We should strive to be men who know the times that we're in. But reconciling that with Ecclesiastes, which is also true, that there's nothing new under the sun, no matter when you live. I think that the reconciliation is that there is nothing new under the sun, but things are they're given new masks. They put, there's new paint jobs on them. They're the same things, good or bad, but they're just repackaged for the modern technology and the modern issues. And so I think you should want to be a man who knows the times that you're in. And usually the way to cultivate that is by reading men who've come before you who clearly knew the times that they were in.
Right.
For all of his faults, and there are some, C.S. Lewis knew the times. Yep. Chesterton knew the times. Tolkien knew the times. Bobbing knew the times. Augustine knew the times. Athanasius knew the times. So read men that have known the times and try to say, okay, well, I'm going to be formed by these men's thought, knowing that there's nothing new under the sun. So I can take these principles and apply them now, and I will, Lord willing, be a man that knows the times.
So you mentioned a couple names there. I want to nail you down on a couple of recommendations. So I'm sure, and
I love talking.
You guys, right? And it was really funny. I want to say I can't remember if it was on Eric's show or if it was at King's Hall, but the three of them did a book episode that was like 3.5 hours long.
Oh yeah,
and it was like, here's our top 5 books. And there's 40 books each that they've done. So we're not going to do that because I
have to work with those guys every day. I get to work with those guys every day.
There you go. So,
but it is like that all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not going to turn this into that. But if you've got a couple that are in each of those categories, some of the like historical from some of those guys that you mentioned, good works that would be good to read, and then also some in the fiction realm, just from a storytelling perspective, that you would recommend as well. I guarantee I know one of the ones that you're going to list, but I bet you do. but go ahead and crank out the list.
If you had to read one book, no, seriously. If you so in terms of theology, I think that is important, and well, obviously it's important. But I think that people should read it. Yeah, that's what I mean. Herman Bavinck's Reformed Dogmatics is just unmatched. It's unmatched. It's once you get used to his style, his pathos just sings, and you know that this guy is so convinced by what he's saying, and his vision for the Christian life is beautiful. So I would recommend that. If you had to pick one, maybe his volume 2 on God and creation is just insanely good. So that's really good. Louis Berkhoff also has a single volume systematic that's wonderful. If you get that, get the edition with the prolegomena at the beginning. It's like 200-page intro. It's really, really good. That's kind of more dry though. So in terms of a beautiful vision for what the world is, G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy is a really formative book for me. Anthony Esselin's Out of the Ashes is one of the books that I read a long time. It's actually right over here. I read it a long time ago. And then I just reread it this year for a book thing that we're doing at the church. And I was like, oh, I had no clue that this is where I got all of those habits and all of those ideas and convictions. Really formative book. It's really, really good. For fiction, I'm far more interested in fiction. Nonfiction, it doesn't really do it for me as much. For fiction, C.S. Lewis's Ransom trilogy is unbelievable. So I'm going to just go off on a rant on Lewis and Tolkien and just rattle off what I think everyone must read from those two. So,
Perfect.
C.S. Lewis, the Ransom trilogy, or as I like to call it, the Heaven trilogy. That's a man. By the end of the third book, you'll be like, "How was he a prophet?" So,
Right.
Heaven trilogy, really, really good. Especially Paralandra, the second one.
Yep.
Just it is a gut punch of recognizing that God turned everything good from an eternal decree, knowing that man would sin and ordaining it even, and yet he turned it all good. But at the same time, we did lose something. We lost something when we sinned in the garden. I don't understand how he did it. So read Paralandra. It's mostly dialogue. You'll love it.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then Narnia. Narnia is usually overlooked by adults, and it shouldn't be. Read Narnia in publication order, as is right, and then read Planet Narnia by Michael Ward, and then read Narnia again. And it will completely change and enrich how you view the story. It's just amazing. Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis, again, is his best book, and it's not even close. It's not even close. One of the most influential fiction books I've ever read. And then C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image is another book for a vision of the world that's older. It's more medieval, and it's just amazing. So read that. Paradise Lost is the best poem in the English language, and it's not even close. Dante's Divine Comedy is unbelievable. If you read it from start to finish, Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, the last line of the Paradiso, I will give $5 because I'm not a wealthy man. I will give $5 to any man who can read that last line, having diligently read all the rest of it and not shed a tear. It's just insane. So that's really good. Let's see here. Edmund Spencer's The Fairy Queen is amazing. That Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Everyone has to read that. That book is so funny, and it helps you gain a picture into the human psyche that I don't know how Jane Austen knew so much about the way people think, especially as a woman who's able to write men so well. That's pretty uncommon, and she's able to do it, and it's really, really great.
That's a good one.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Both of those are overlooked, but they're classics. They're just so good.
Yep.
The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. You'll get really sad, but you'll become more of a Christian. Dostoevsky's really great at showing that the wise go to the house of mourning, and you take a lot of lessons from that. And now, my guy, I have to go. The best author in the English language is J.R.R. Tolkien. With him, we reached our peak, and we have yet to come close to reaching it again. T.S. Eliot said that Dante and Shakespeare divide the world between them, and there's not a third. There's a third. It's Tolkien, and he's in the middle. The Silmarillion is the best book I've ever read, and it isn't close. I know I keep saying that about a lot of different things, but like, Till We Have Faces is the best Lewis book, and it's not close, and that's true. But the Silmarillion is the best book I've ever read, and I am reading it now for, I think, the 7th time, and it has not lost a single ounce of its strength. It's mythology. Mm-hmm. You have to keep that in mind. Yeah. It's not just a fiction book. It's a myth, a holistic myth, and it is, oh my goodness. It will form you if you stick with it. If you give him your heart for those 350 pages or whatever, he will make you into a better man. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. It's just, there are no words. You can't.
And it's a different type of read than the other, like than the trilogy or the Hobbit. So like you said, you have to keep a couple of these things in mind going into it, because if you
expect Lord of the Rings prequel, you're going to be disappointed.
Right. There was a group that I'm a part of. And one of the guys in it recently, he's like, I've seen all the movies, but I've never just read the books. Like, where do you recommend I start? Should I start with the trilogy? Should I start with the Hobbit? And one of the other guys is like, start with the Silmarillion. I'm like, don't start with that.
Don't start with that.
That's later.
No.
That's later.
Read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings go without saying. If you haven't read those, then you're a dullard. Read The Hobbit, read The Lord of the Rings, get a love for Middle Earth, and then go read The Silmarillion.
Yes.
And know that it's going to be very different. But just know that going into it.
Right.
And you'll be enriched. There's no doubt. There's so many more that could be said. But man, all of those books are so good. It's just The Silmarillion is unreal.
And I think I sent you a message a couple of weeks back, and I've spaced on getting back into it, but I just started it for the first time, to sit down and go through it maybe about 2 weeks ago. Yes. And I had a few days where I'm getting back into it right now, but I just spaced out and started doing other stuff, and I didn't get back, but I'm back into it now. So this is my first time going front to back through it. So
you have these lines that he comes up with that's just, they're just crazy. There's the God of the universe says that anyone who tries to sow discord into his will think himself successful, but will only prove in the end to be my instrument, playing the music that I want. And he's a closet Calvinist, and then there's springs of joy flow up from a deep pit in the earth of sorrow, just
so good,
just so good.
So good.
But reading these good stories, they give you cognitive power, and that's what you want. You want cognitive power in the world. So as far as you can have it, you should get it. And reading really good fiction is, I think, the best way to do it. Read Shakespeare too. I didn't say anything, but obviously you should read Shakespeare.
That's awesome, dude. Great list. We'll wrap it up there. We could have done another 2 hours on the books that you just listed, but dude, thank you for making time today, man. I had a blast going over some of this stuff with you. And why don't you do all the plugs for everybody so they can go follow the show?
Oh, dang, you just cut out. That's so
am I back?
Oh, wait a minute.
Am I back?
Yep.
There we go. Why don't you do all the plugs for the show and the Patreon and all that stuff so people can go and follow you guys and do that. And I'll tell everybody this. There's 1.5 million podcasts that have Patreon accounts, right?
Indeed.
Honestly, you guys is the only one that I pay for.
No way.
I'm not even kidding.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, and it's awesome because you guys have the extra show that you do every week, and there's all kinds of other stuff in there. But yeah, man, dude, I had a blast talking to you today. So put out all the stuff for everybody so they can follow along.
Yeah. No. Hey, well, thank you for supporting the show. That is so kind. We're very, very grateful. And thank you for making time for me to come on. This has been such a blessing. I really am so grateful that we got to chat and kind of meet each other and talk about all this stuff. Thank you. Yeah. Plugs for the show. Haunted Cosmos. We're on Twitter at Haunted Cosmos _ I think. We're on Instagram. We never post, but you can follow us there if you want. We just finished season 2. We normally drop main shows every other Wednesday, but that just ended for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And instead, we'll be dropping a sneak peek of our Patreon exclusive weekly show, The Dusty Tome, every Wednesday for the next few weeks until season 3 begins. And if you like those Dusty Tome episodes and you want to hear more of them, become a patron. We try to make sure that we give you the value that you pay for. And we want to make sure we actually give you much more value than that. So we put a ton of work into Patreon. So yeah, if you like the Dusty Tome, there's 45 other episodes that are just like it that are on our Patreon. You can go listen to them. We have some Sunday school lectures in there about strange Bible stories. I'm slowly plotting our way through Saint Basil's Hexameron, his homilies on creation. Very interesting.
Nice.
I'll do some more audiobooks. I'll try to do the Fairy Queen at some point and put it on Patreon. And then I think that's it. Be on the lookout for the book when it ever drops. And if you're interested in how Brian and I talk to each other and think, then the book will be for you. So, and then we do have a New Christendom Press, which is our parent company that we operate under. New Christendom Press has their 2nd annual conference coming up in June, first weekend of June. And you can go to newchristendompress.com and find the conference tab, get all the info about that. Brian and I will be doing a live Maine Haunted Cosmos show at the conference.
Nice.
Which will be interesting. We'll see how that goes. and we'd love to see you there. So I think that covers everything.
Perfect. Well, dude, Ben, I really appreciate it, man. And thank you for making time, man.
Man, thank you.